All right, everybody, welcome back to class. And what we have on the agenda for today is we are going to begin to explore the Studer Vista console. Studer makes a series of consoles in the Vista series. They make the Vista 5, the Vista 9, the Vista V. The one that we have in our classroom today is the Studer Vista 9. This is a console that is kind of specifically meant for broadcast audio. You don't have to use it just for broadcast. You could use this in really any capacity that you could use a console, recording, live sound, what have you. But it does have some features in it that are sort of broadcast centric. So let's begin dissecting this, and where we would like to start is, of course, the software. You guys are familiar with digital consoles. There's always three components to a digital board. You have the actual control surface, which is what this is. You have the brain, sort of the DSP engine, the computer that runs everything. And then, of course, you have the software that you use to configure everything. The software for the Studer Vista series of consoles is Windows only. So if any of you guys wanted to download the Vista software to kind of start poking around with it yourself, just keep in mind that it is a Windows only application. As far as that goes, I would like to mention that in class we don't really go over the Studer Vista to the degree that we go over other consoles. When you guys are in SSL class, you study the SSL for a couple cycles and really kind of dissect what that board's all about. In here, the console is not really our main focus. Broadcast audio is the main focus. So we go over just enough of how to use the console so that we can accomplish what we need to in class. But if you guys are interested in learning more about the Vista, there's actually a certification that you can get that's online. Harman is an audio company, kind of a parent company that owns a lot of other companies, and Studer is one of their companies. And they actually have a website, Harman University, where you can log on and actually get all sorts of different certifications for all sorts of different things. And one of the certs you can get is the Studer Vista cert. There should be a link for that on Crass Connect. So after you're done with our class today, you can wander onto Crass Connect. And we have created, here at the school, we've created a step-by-step sort of walkthrough that helps you navigate that website and can help you get that certification. So for right now, let's take a look at the software. All right, so let's take a look at the software as we have it. It is Windows software, as I mentioned earlier, but it looks a little bit different in the way that most computer applications have drop-down menus that you can click on, and it will, bring up that sort of drop-down pop-up menu. This software doesn't really do that. The purpose of broadcast is, how do I want to say it? One of the aspects of broadcast audio that we have to really focus on is being fast. You need to do things very quickly, very efficiently. And to make this software a little bit quicker and more efficient, instead of having drop-down menus that pop up, instead what they give you is this toolbar that's sort of permanently up here on the screen. So when I click the button that says Tools, instead of bringing up a pop-up menu, it just permanently changes what's in the toolbar. And it stays there until you select something else. So we have Tools, Settings, General Patch, and then Snapshot. I'm not really going to focus on a lot of that stuff right now. The only button that's in the toolbar right now that I really kind of want to spend a lot of time focusing on is this one. You have a button on the very, very left, sort of in the top left corner, called Views. And when you click on the Views button, that does bring up a tiny little pop-up window called the navigation bar. The navigation bar takes you to the 5 different pages, or what the software calls views. What is a view? Well, let's take a look. Notice we have 5 different views, and if I just select a different view, notice, boom, everything that I see on the page changes. So the software refers to this as a view, but I kind of like to refer to it or think of it as like a software page, like a whole new screen. So you've got the channel patch view, which we will talk about today. You have the general patch view, which we will talk about today. You have the snapshot page, which we will talk about today. You have strip setup, which we'll talk about today. And then last but not least, you have QList, which we're not really going to talk about today. QList is not really something that we do a lot, but I am going to spend just a moment to very briefly talk about it so that you can kind of understand why it's in here. The Studer Vista software was sort of made for broadcast. However, it is popular in another aspect of audio, and that is theater audio, Broadway audio. And if you think about it, that makes sense because Broadway is a live show and broadcast is a live show. You know, theatrical is live and TV is live. So this console, being sort of a live console for shows, works really, really, really well in the theater, like the Broadway market. And so they went ahead and added this particular page, which really, really works well in theater. Basically, the idea behind this page is you can create scene automation that can then be recalled throughout the Broadway show or the theatrical show that you're doing. And to kind of put that into context, when you're doing a theatrical show, let's say there's 30 people that are all mic'd up, 30 different people that have microphones on. Well, not all of those microphones need to be on at the same time. You might have one scene where certain people are on the stage, and then in the next scene they leave and other people come on the stage. So what you can do with this particular page is create scene automation. Let's say Act 1, Scene 1 of your show, you might have certain microphones that are on. And then for Act 1, Scene 2, you have people that leave the stage and other people that come onto the stage. So you might need to mute certain microphones and then unmute other microphones. That's kind of what this is all about. You can create different automation cues for the different acts and the different scenes in the theatrical show. Very, very, very cool feature. We don't really use it in broadcast. You could if you wanted to. I don't see why not, but it's not something that we really use. So I just kind of wanted to make mention of that so that way you understand why this particular screen is in here. What I would rather focus on to start is I'm going to click on the Views button and I am going to navigate to the General Patch page. This is probably the screen that we're going to spend the most amount of time on for sure. What is the General Patch page? To be perfectly honest, I don't know how much of this I really even need to explain as far as the concept. I think you guys have seen software pages like this before. This is basically your digital patch bay. You have an XY grid, a vertical grid, and a horizontal grid. Pro Tools, I/O Setups is very analogous to this. The Digi Venue console in the live sound room, its input and output patching is pretty much the same thing as this. A lot of Yamaha digital consoles like the PM1D way back in the day, it had input and output patching that was essentially the same as this. So this is a pretty common concept. Dante, if you're familiar with Dante, the patching and the routing that you do in the Dante software is essentially this. So this is a very, very, very popular way of demonstrating or visualizing how to patch a signal into the console. Let's take a look at exactly what kind of inputs we have and where they can go. So on this patch page, you have a vertical axis, of course, the one that goes up and down, and then you have the horizontal axis, the one that goes left and right. On your vertical axis, we have all of the actual physical inputs that you can plug something into on this console. Physical inputs means actually taking a cable and plugging it into some sort of a jack field like an XLR. So let's take a look at what we have. First of all, it says MADI A stage box 1 through 32. Earlier in class, last week, you guys did a hands-on signal flow involving the Studer Remote Stage Box. The Studer Remote Stage Box has 32 XLR inputs. Those XLR inputs can be mic inputs or line inputs, it doesn't matter. Well, plugging a microphone into the stage box is not enough to get it into the console. What you now have to do is tell the software that you have something actually plugged into that stage box. So the Studer stage box has 32 XLR inputs. Those XLR inputs can be mic or a line, but plugging a microphone into one of those XLR inputs on the stage box is not enough to get it into the console. You would then have to come to this page and actually tell the system, tell the software that you have something plugged into that input of the stage box. So there's our 32 stage box inputs, but you'll notice that if I scroll down some more, it continues to say MADI 33, 34, 35, 36. It doesn't say stage box anymore, but the MADI numbers do continue. remember that the stage box outputs a MADI signal, and MADI is a digital audio protocol that carries 64 channels of audio. So even though the stage box only has 32 actual inputs, the MADI card that the stage box plugs into can register 64 inputs. So what that means is you don't have to just plug the Studer stage box into the MADI input of the console. You can plug any device that has a MADI output into the MADI input of our console. It doesn't matter. When we actually take our broadcast truck out to do sporting events like NASCAR or Diamondbacks or Phoenix Suns, what we actually do is we take the MADI output of the Fox Sports digital console and we plug it into the MADI input of our console, like just direct console to console connection, and we choose what 64 channels of audio they have that we want, and then they just send it right across. So at that stage in the game, we're not really using the stage box, we're using just another console to get signal in. And it just recognizes right away, it picks it up, and it's just a beautiful thing. So if you scroll down, you'll notice that sure enough, we have 64 total channels for that input. If you continue to scroll down, you'll notice that we have another batch of stage box inputs. It says MADI B stage box. So our console actually has two different MADI cards, MADI card A and MADI card B, so we could plug in two different stage boxes at the same time. It's very rare that we do that, but we can do that if we need to. And also notice that the MADI inputs continue past the 32. We have a total of 64. So what that means is this console has a grand total of 128 digital audio MADI inputs that we can use. And again, that's what we do when we take our truck out to things like NASCAR or the Diamondbacks. We just take MADI inputs, MADI splits off of the Fox Sports trucks or the NBC Sports trucks, and we get 128 copies of all of their signals on just two fiber cables, two MADI cables, and it's awesome. It really, really works exceedingly well. If you continue to scroll down, we'll get into some actual analog inputs now. Right here, we have 4 inputs that are labeled local mic 1, 2, 3, 4. What does that mean, local mic 1, 2, 3, 4? Those are 4 analog mic pre's that are only accessible on the TT patch bay that's out there in the hallway. So if you wanted to get a microphone signal in from, say, this room, you could take a mic, plug it into a tie line. That tie line shows up in the patch bay in the hallway, and you can just cross patch right in. We quite often use these 4 local mic pre-inputs as backups in case any of our digital stuff goes wrong. We've got analog hardwires that we can use. Now, a lot of people really get concerned because they look at this and they say, well, we've only got 4 analog mic pre-inputs on this entire console. Why do we only have 4? I mean, that seems like a small number. Well, keep in mind that we have 64 mic inputs if we add both of our stage boxes together. And that's what you would primarily use, would be your stage box inputs. So I like to kind of view these as backup mics, something that I'll plug in but not necessarily use if I don't absolutely have to. Same thing with our local line inputs. If you scroll down some more, you'll notice that we have 16 inputs here that are labeled local line inputs, 1 through 16. Those are 16 analog line level inputs that are, again, only accessible on the actual TT patch bay that's out there in the hallway. So if I wanted to get my iPhone, let's say, for music into this console, I could take the headphone jack of my iPhone, again, plug it into a couple tie lines, they show up on the patch bay, and then I just cross patch with a couple TT cables right into these line inputs, and then they just show right up. Again, 16 doesn't sound like a lot. A lot of people say only 16 inputs. That's not very many. Remember, we have the stage box. The stage box gives us 64 XLR inputs of either mic or line. And then if we need some more, we have some extras here. Also notice that for both the local mic inputs and the local line inputs, we have a couple of inputs that say not used. The thing you need to know about these mic inputs and these line inputs is that they actually exist on cards. If you remember earlier from the on-site class, the Studer S-Core is what we call a modular frame, which means that all of its capability it can basically be extended through the purchase of individual cards. So if we wanted more microphone inputs or more analog line inputs on our console, all you have to do is buy a card, just an individual card, and then it slides into a module slot, almost like a computer when you put a card into a PC slot. On this particular system, the way it's designed, you get 4 mic pre's on 1 mic pre card. So right now our console has 1 mic pre card, 4 mic inputs, but there's room for a second card. So that's what the 4 not used lines say here. We could actually buy a second mic pre card and go ahead and plug it in and get an extra 4. With the line inputs, you actually get 8 line inputs on each line input card. So we have 2 line input cards, which gives us 16, but notice that down here we have 8 extra slots that say not used. If we wanted to buy a third card, we could go ahead and do that and then get 8 more inputs. If you scroll down some more, this is where we get into our AES-EBU inputs. You guys are familiar with AES-EBU, digital audio protocol that carries 2 channels of audio on 1 cable. AES signals, I personally feel, are kind of meant to be stereo, but they do not have to be stereo. They can be individual copies of multiple mono if you would like. We have 16 AES-EBU inputs on this console, and remember that every AES input carries 2 channels of audio, so really, if you break it out, we have 32 individual AES inputs. This is the primary method that allows us to get audio from the camera. You guys know from your signal flow earlier last week with Zach, the keynote class you did with Zach, when you plug a microphone into the camera here at the school, the camera embeds the audio. You then take that signal and plug it into the studio converter, which de-embeds the audio, and the de-embedded audio is sent to the console as an AES-EBU input. So we've got 32 of those, which, to be perfectly honest, is kind of a lot. And then if you continue to scroll down, this is going to get us into the Dante inputs. This particular console of ours has 2 different Dante inputs, and even though Dante, which, by the way, I'm sure you're familiar with Dante, digital audio that's distributed as an IP network, it's fantastic. Even though Dante, I believe, can handle up to 512 channels of audio, if I think I'm right about that, our console caps it at 64. So we have 2 Dante cards. Each Dante card gives us 64 channels of audio for another 128 channels of digital audio. So if you add up all the channels of audio that you can get into this console, you have 128 MADI inputs, 128 Dante inputs, and then 4 analog mic inputs, and then 16 analog line inputs, and then another 32 AES-EBU inputs. I've already lost track. It's 300 and something. It's more I/O than you would probably need for whatever show you're trying to do. It's more than what we need for the show that we're trying to do. Now, those are the actual inputs that the console has. Like, what kind of signal can you plug into the console? Every console, of course, has a certain number of channels that you can use to access that audio, and that's what we have on the bottom of our screen. The horizontal axis of our screen, this is where we access all the channels. So how many channels does the console have? Well, starting here, you have a label that says input M1, input 1, and then over here on the right, you have another one that says input M64, input 1. Basically, that represents mono channels. The Studer Vista 9 that we have here at the school has 64 mono channels that you can use, and then if you continue to scroll over to the right, you'll notice that we now have inputs that are labeled input S1 and input S20. Those are stereo channels. So the way our particular console is configured, we have 64 mono channels that we can use and then 20 stereo channels that we can use. So even though we have over 300 inputs, we can really only use maybe 100 of those inputs at any one time for the show that we're doing. It's all about mixing and matching. A few other things to go over that are kind of miscellaneous about the console but are important to know. This console has 8 mono auxiliary sends. It has 8 stereo auxiliary sends. and then it has two different stereo output buses, and then it has one surround sound output bus. And we'll get into the output buses in just a little bit. So what I would like to do now is go over how to actually get a signal into this console. If I take a mic and plug it into the console, how do I get that signal into the board? Let's just say, for sake of argument, that you have a microphone plugged in to stage box input number 1. So I'm going to scroll up in the software to MADI A, stage box input number 1. I'm going to select it. Notice a red line goes all the way across the horizontal axis of the screen. What I have to do now is just decide what channel I would like that signal to go into. So let's just say, for fun, I'm going to pick channel 20. So down here at the bottom on the horizontal axis, I'm going to click Input M20. And notice when I click on that, it gives me a red line that goes vertically up the screen. Just like every other software you've ever seen that has XY patching, the horizontal axis, the vertical axis, where the two crosshairs meet, that's where you need to make your patch. How do you do that? You just double left click on your mouse. Or in this particular case, we have a trackball. You can use a mouse on the Studer console if you want to, but it comes with a trackball built in. I personally don't mind the trackball, but some people are not into that. So there is a USB port up on the top that you can use to plug in a mouse if your heart desires. All you have to do is double left click on where the crosshair meets and the patch turns green. Green means we have a mono to mono patch. Pretty simple. If your left click doesn't work, you can also click the right click button and then select mono to mono. When you click on your right click on your mouse button, that actually brings up a little pop-up menu. And again, we can click a mono to mono patch and the patch will turn green. That's pretty nifty. If you double click again, patch goes away, or you could right click and hit the ground arrow and that would remove the patch as well. Now, if you needed to make a whole bunch of patches all at the exact same time, if your patches are arranged in such a way where they do what I call stair step, where 1 goes to 1, 2 goes to 2, 3 goes to 3, what you can do is you can click and hold, left click and hold on a patch point, and then move your mouse to diagonally to the right. That will select a whole bunch of individual patch points. And if you right click, oh, for crying out loud, sometimes it does that, I swear, I don't know why. If you right click in the middle of that, it'll bring up a pop-up menu that says auto. If you click auto, it will automatically stair step or cascade all of those patches. Now that's a very, very, very fast and efficient way of patching all of your inputs into the console, but it really only works if you have your inputs designed in this particular way. And in the world of broadcast, it is not always this clean cut. Quite often what you end up having is channel 1 might be plugged into one place and then channel 2 might be plugged somewhere else, and you end up with kind of this sort of scattered mess of patches. That to me is a little bit more common. But if you can design your patches in that particular method of doing the stair step, boy, that just makes everything really, 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 really quick. So for right now, I'm not going to do that. For right now, I'm going to stick with my input 1, which is patched into channel 20. What I would now like to do, now that I have that patch made, is I need to label what this audio patch is, so that way I understand what's going on the console. Now, the Studer software actually gives you the ability to name either the input that you've patched or the actual channel that you've patched into. If you look in the software, you'll notice, of course, I've got MADI A stage box 1 as my input. I have channel 20 as my channel. The Studer software gives me the ability to name either one. It doesn't matter. You can rename your input if you like. You can rename your channel if you like. It really doesn't make a difference. I personally prefer it if you rename the input instead of the channel, and Studer kind of has built the software that way. They kind of intend for you to rename the input and not the channel. Why do they want you to rename the input instead of the channel? Well, I can't really, speak for them. But if you ask me, I think it has to do with the fact that the channel doesn't really even mean anything. The channel doesn't exist. When you have an analog console, you have channels. You actually have hardware channels, like on the Neotech or the API or the SSL. You have a channel strip that you can pull out. In digital consoles, the channel strips are virtual. They don't actually physically exist. It's just the software telling you, hey, this is a channel of audio, but at the end of the day, it's just DSP. So naming the channel, to me, doesn't really mean much because it doesn't exist anyway. Studer even refers to it as a virtual channel. Naming the input, I feel, makes a lot more sense, and I'll show you why that's kind of handy when we start getting onto the actual control surface itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to name my input, and the way that I do this is I put my mouse right on the input that says MADI A1 Stagebox, and I'm going to right-click. Right-clicking brings up a pop-up menu. What do you want to do? I want to edit the software label for this. So I'm going to put my mouse on Edit Label. Notice I get two options. I get User and I get Fixed. What do I want to name? I want to name the user label for this particular input because I am the user of the console. I am the one using this console. We'll get into what fixed label is in a little bit, but for right now, that's what I want to do. I'm the user of the board, so I'm going to click on User. It brings up a pop-up menu, and where's my keyboard? Oh, it's magic. If the cameraman pans right down here really, really quickly, I have a little area of the console. It's kind of probably hard to see from the camera angle, but your keyboard is actually right down here. If you give it a push, it'll pop right out. And just a normal standard QWERTY keyboard. Of course, you do have a USB port on the console itself that you can use to plug in a second-party keyboard if you would like to. But for right now, I'm just going to use this one. And let's name this Main Mic. Cool. So I've named it Main Mic. From here, you have a couple different options. If you click Enter on the keyboard, what it will do is it will take you to the next available input that you can go ahead and name. So naming inputs on the software can be actually very, 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 very quick. All you have to do is name and then hit enter and then name again, hit enter, name again, hit enter, 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 and you can just kind of go down the line. Once you're done naming, you just click the OK button in the software, and then there we go. So now MADI A1 Stagebox Input 1 has been renamed Main Microphone. Now, I do want to take a very, very, very brief moment to explain something about this console that can trip people up. Every single input on this console can have up to 3 different names. The name that we just changed is what we call the user label. The user label is 100% customizable by you, the user of the console. You could have it say anything you want. I decided to call it Main Microphone. You could have it be called Mic 1. I could have called it Corey or Zach or Brock. You can customize the name of it. However, in the software, you have a button in the toolbar that says User. And this is a button that's going to toggle you between your different names for this input. So right now we're on User. If I click it again, it's going to give me inherited device. It says INH/DVEV. That is short for inherited device. And basically, that's a name that we have given to whatever device that particular input is attached to. So notice when I click inherited device, the label reverted back to MADI A Stagebox 1. The reason the label referred to that or reverted back to that is because that's what the actual input is. I've renamed it Main Microphone, but the actual input that I've plugged it into was a MADI input, XLR input on the Studer Compact Remote Stagebox. That is the actual physical device. And that's what that means, inherited device. What type of hardware device is this input connected to? If I click that button a third time, it brings up a user label, or excuse me, it brings up a label called Fixed. This is not anything we would change at all. This is basically an ID input for the computer to recognize what this input is. I almost kind of like to refer to it as, say, a MAC address. Notice now, instead of saying stage box A1, it says I33B1H1 Maddie 3 of 1. That's literally just almost think of it as like a serial number or a barcode. Or a MAC address for what that input is, so that way the software understands from a technical standpoint what this is. This is not a label that you would ever want to change. It pretty much needs to stay static, so that way the computer understands itself. So I'm going to go ahead and click back to user label, and now it says main microphone. So that's how you make a mono input to mono channel patch. However, some of the channels that we need to plug in are going to be stereo channels. Some of the signals that we're going to plug into the board are going to be stereo channels. Let me show you how to do that. Let's say that I have music that I want to plug in, and that music is coming in analog line level. So I'm going to scroll down here to analog line inputs 1 and 2. Those are my stereo signal. Line input 1 is the left channel, and then line input 2 is going to be the right channel. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my mouse to select the local line input number 1, but then instead of patching into a couple mono channels, I'm going to scroll on the horizontal axis and select stereo input number 1, input S1. Now, to be clear, you can plug a stereo signal into 2 mono channels if you want to, and that way you'll use 2 faders to adjust your left and right. You absolutely can do that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. The problem I have with that is that that's kind of a waste of real estate. On this console, you've only got 40 faders that you can use, and if you burned up 2 faders for what's essentially the same input, a stereo input, I think that's kind of a waste of real estate. So instead, what I would rather do is take my stereo signal and plug it into a stereo channel in the software. What happens with that is, instead of having 2 faders on the board that you'll use for your left and right, you'll actually just have 1 fader that will be accessible, that will be your left and your right signal combined, saving me a fader. So I think that's the better way to do it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the software and actually get this done. So right now I have local line input 1 selected. You can see I clicked on it right there. I have stereo channel 1 selected. I have it clicked on right there. So where the crosshairs meet, I am going to double click to make the patch. Watch what happens when I double click to make this patch. It didn't make the patch. What it did instead is it brought up a pop-up menu. This pop-up menu is Studer's way of asking you, hey man, exactly what are you trying to do here? I see that you're trying to take a mono input, a left channel input, but you're plugging it into a stereo channel, a channel that has a left side and a right side. So what exactly are you trying to do? And it gives me 3 different options. You've actually seen these options before. This is not really a new concept. If you remember way back in the day messing around with the M3000 reverb unit in one of the other control rooms, it gives you input options that are very similar to this. It's basically asking me right now, hey man, do you want this mono channel to go to the left side of this stereo channel? Do you want this mono signal to go to the right side of your stereo channel? Or do you want me to actually mult it and send it to the left and the right equally? Exactly what is it you want to do? And in this particular case, I'm working under the assumption that channel 1 or line input 1 is my left channel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select mono to left. Notice the patch turns green just like it did before. Green means mono to mono patch, but notice that the symbol on it shows that it's only going to the left side of this channel. Well, now it's time to patch up the right side of this channel. So I'm going to select with the mouse local line input 2, because in this practice scenario that we're doing, that's going to be the right side of my stereo channel, or my stereo image that I'm trying to capture. And here's where people get tripped up. A lot of people think, oh, you probably want to go to the next one down, right? So you want it to go here, you want line input 2 to go to the next one. No, actually I don't. I want line input 2 to go to the remaining the remaining signal path of my first channel. So I'm actually going to select, reselect input stereo 1, and that's the crosshair that I want. I want line input 2, which is my right signal, to go into stereo input 1. I double click to make the patch, and notice once again it brings up that pop-up menu, but this time I want my mono signal to go to the right side of this stereo channel. Boom, you select it, and look at what happened. Notice that those two patches and the corresponding label for input stereo actually turned yellow. Local line input 1 is green, local line input 2 is green, but the patches themselves and the label for this channel are actually yellow. In the Studer software, they use color coding to get across certain ideas. Anything that's green is going to be a mono to mono patch, but anything that shows up in the patch page as yellow, that means that there is some sort of multiple patch situation happening. It means that either something has been multed or it means that something has been split out into stereo. So in this particular case, the local line input patch is green because it's only going to one spot. The local line input 2 patch is green because it's only going to one spot, but the input stereo 1 is yellow because there are multiple patches associated with that particular source. So anything that's green means mono to mono, but anything that's yellow means that there are multiple patches are involved. Either something has been multed or in this particular case, something has been patched in stereo. Lather, rinse, repeat. That's all we do to get signals into the console. We just keep patching and keep patching and keep patching and keep patching until everything is done. We should probably label our stereo input that we have patched in, just like we did with the microphone. So let's pan back up and take a look. Once again, I am going to click on local line input 1. I'm actually going to right click on it, just like we did before, and select edit label user. And I'm going to call this music because that's what I'm pretending in this situation this is stereo music. I'm going to call it music. Then I'm just going to hit enter on the keyboard to go to the next one down. And I'm going to name this music and then a space and then a capital R for right. So now in my software, I have music and I have music right. Now, at this stage in the game, a lot of people say, wait a minute, hold the phone. I'm confused. How come you did not name music left, but you did name music right? How come you didn't bother to name the left? Well, there's a couple different reasons. First one is, I don't think I absolutely need to. If I have a right channel of something, common sense would denote that I have the left channel of something, so I don't think it's necessary. But there's actually a more important reason as to why I left it out. And that has to do with the actual control surface. If we take a look at the actual control surface, what you're going to notice right now is that the two signals that I've patched into the board, my main microphone and then my music signal, neither one of those are actually showing up on the control surface right now. That's a little bit different than a lot of digital consoles that you've seen in the past. On a lot of digital consoles, as soon as you patch an input into a channel, it shows up on the board. And that's because on a lot of digital console systems, the software channels that you see in the software are the same as the actual physical channels that you would find on the control surface itself. That's how the PM1D worked way back in the day. If you took a signal and patched it into input 1 in the software, it would automatically show up as channel 1 on the hardware, on the actual control surface itself. A lot of digital consoles still work like that today. That is not how this console works at all. On this console, the channels as they exist in the software have absolutely nothing to do with the channels as they exist on the control surface. There is no predefined relationship whatsoever. So after you're done patching and naming everything in the software, you then have to go to the control surface and decide where you want those channels to be, which I personally enjoy. In the spirit of fairness, I should mention that there are a lot of broadcast engineers that don't really like that. There are some broadcast engineers that think that channel 1 in the software should match up with channel 1 in the hardware. Like that's how it should be. It should be 1 to 1 and 2 to 2 and 3 to 3. I disagree. I think it's kind of cool that you can move your channels anywhere you want to, regardless of what the software number is. I think it's the Pro Tools mentality that's in me. In Pro Tools, you don't really have channel numbers. You have channel numbers when you first create a session, but the very first thing you do is you rename what those channels are. So channel 1 becomes kick, channel 2 becomes snare, channel 3 becomes bass, et cetera, et cetera. And as soon as you do that, whatever numerical representation those channels had in Pro Tools is essentially gone. The kick drum channel isn't channel 1, it's just the kick drum channel. And you can move it anywhere in the mix window that you want to, and it doesn't matter that you've moved channel 1 to channel 5 because it's not even really channel 1 anymore. It's just the kick drum channel. That's how I view this. I don't view our main microphone as channel 20. It's just the main microphone channel, and I can place it anywhere on the control surface that I want to. I have the freedom to move it around. If the numbers don't match, it doesn't really make any difference because they're not real anyway. That's kind of my viewpoint of it. So going back to why I didn't label the music left, but I did label the music right, eventually we're going to take that music channel and put it on the console. Because it's a stereo channel, it's only going to use one fader. And because it's only going to use one fader, there's only going to be room for one label. By default, in a stereo situation, Studer uses the left label as the primary label on the console. So if I were to name this music left and music right, when I take that stereo channel and put it on the console, it's only going to show up as music left, even though it technically is your music left and your music right signal. The label itself will only say music left. And that, I feel, can be confusing to a lot of people. You'll look and you'll say, well, there's only music left. Where's the music right? Well, it's both. It just says music left because of how it assigns software names. So traditionally what we do instead is we do not label the left side left, but we do label the right side right. So that way when I look in the software, I know that it's a stereo image, but when I take that channel and actually put it on the console, it will just say music. It won't say music left, it won't say music right, it'll just say music, and that way I know that that is in fact my music. Pretty cool. All right, so I think that we're at about that spot, to be perfectly honest, where now that I've shown you how to patch signals in, I think now I want to start to show you how to get signals, or how to get those channels populated onto the control surface. So, to do this, I am going to go up to my navigation bar in the software. I'm going to click the Views button to bring up the navigation bar. And there is a window that I want to bring up, a view that I want to bring up called Strip Setup. When I click on Strip Setup, you'll notice that a pop-up window appears in the software. And let me explain what it is that we're looking at. Every one of these bars that you're looking at in this strip setup window represents a fader on the console. And you guys are familiar with how consoles work. Usually on consoles, faders are in banks, what they call fader banks, really. And different people have different terminologies, but in the analog world, that's quite often what they call them. You would have bank 1, bank 2, bank 3. On this particular console, it's kind of the same. Faders are organized in banks. However, the terminology that Studer uses is bays. So you have fader bay 1, fader bay 2, fader bay 3. In this particular case, these 10 faders that I have highlighted right here make up fader bay 1, and that is going to be this bank of 10 faders on the actual control surface. So this would be fader bay 1. The next bank over is going to be fader bay 2, and that's going to be these 10 faders if I highlight them in the software. And then the last 10 faders that you see here that I'm going to highlight, those 10 faders make up fader bay 3, which on the control surface is right here, fader bay 3. So if you take a big broad look at the console, on the left we have fader bay 1, next to that is fader bay 2, and then all the way at the end we have fader bay 3. Well, wait a minute. I skipped this. What's this bay all about that I skipped? This is what Studer refers to as the control bay. A lot of people choose to think of the control bay as the master section of the console. That's kind of right. Because it's a digital console, it works a little bit differently than an analog console. I don't know if the term master section is completely appropriate, but it is kind of analogous to that. The control bay, I would say, would be analogous or similar to a master section of a console. However, the thing that is important to know is that the faders in the control bay do not have to be master faders. That's the big thing about the master section of a lot of consoles, like the Neotech, the API, the SSL. The faders that are in the master section have designated jobs that they do. Your dedicated group faders, your stereo bus faders, in the case of the API, your grandmaster fader, all of that stuff would be found in the center section or the master section of an analog console. On this console, even though the control bay is kind of like the master section, these faders do not have to be typical faders that you would find in a master section, like group faders or stereo bus faders. You can have normal input faders be in your control bay. And then the inverse of that is correct. You could put your stereo bus master fader, if you wanted to, in fader bay 1. The master faders on this console don't have to live in the control bay. On this console, any fader can be anything that you want it to be. Any fader can be an input fader, a stereo fader, a surround sound fader, a dedicated group fader. It doesn't make a difference. Every fader on this console is basically a clean slate, and you can have it be anything that you want. So what I want to do is I want to take my main microphone input and its corresponding channel and put it onto one of these faders. So let's go ahead and take a look. So I'm going to go ahead and go to fader bay 2 just for fun. I'm going to click on that fader, which would be, let's see, fader 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Be fader 17. I'm going to go ahead and just click right on that fader. Notice when I click on it, it becomes highlighted. That means I have that fader selected. What you now do is just right click on that fader position, and what pops up is the list of what I can turn that fader into. And as I mentioned earlier, any fader on this console can be anything that you want it to be. So let's take a look. First of all, I can have this fader be any of the inputs that I have patched in, any of the 64 channels, the 20 stereo channels, any of those inputs. Group master. This console has group faders, just like any other analog console. They work exactly the same way. They're used as bus signals. So you could take an input, bus it to group 1, and then group 1 would then be bused to the stereo bus, just like normal grouping. Master faders. As I mentioned earlier, on this console, we have 3 different main output buses. We have 2 stereo output buses, and then we have a surround sound bus. The stereo buses are represented with the letter S. The surround sound bus is actually represented with the letter X. So in the Studer Vista software, whenever you see an X, that represents 5.1 surround sound. Below that, we have aux masters. You guys remember this from your earlier cycles. Every aux has a corresponding aux master. On this console, you can make the aux masters faders if you prefer to have a fader as an aux master. Below that, we have control group master. What is that? What is the difference between a group master and a control group master? A group master is a form of signal flow group. You're actually taking your inputs, busing them to a group fader. Control group is more of a VCA style group. You guys remember on the SSL, you have VCA faders. You can use the little thumb wheels to assign them to a VCA group. That's essentially exactly what this is. In the Studer software, a control group is their digital version of a VCA fader. Below that, we have DAW control. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I've never done this. You're supposed to be able to use the faders on this console to actually control DAW faders like Pro Tools faders or Logic faders. I've never done it. I don't think Zach has ever done it. I'm not sure if Brock has ever done it. But theoretically, it works. So that's kind of neat. And then down below that, last of all, we have something called the vMix. What in the world is the vMix? It's a type of group bus, if you will. What it is essentially is it's an auto mixing bus. The vMix is essentially Studer's version of the Dugan system. Dan Dugan is an engineer who created it, and basically what it is it's an auto mixing bus where you could take 5 different signals, send them to the Dugan bus, or in this case they call it the vMix bus, and what happens is the Studer will automatically raise or lower the volume of the channels that are entering this vMix bus based on how active they are with signal. So let's say you have 5 people that are in conversation. When one person starts to talk, the vMix bus will open up their fader, and then it will automatically attenuate the other faders. And then if that person stops talking and somebody else starts to talk, it will attenuate that person's fader and then open up the fader for the next person that's talking. So it's literally like an auto leveling, auto mixing bus. It works really good when you're having group panel conversations. We generally don't use it a whole lot with what we do here at the school, but just so you know, that's what it is, that's how it works, and I encourage you to mess around with it when you come in after hours, if you want to. For right now, I want to turn my my channel into or I should say my fader, into my main mic input channel. So I'm going to go all the way back up to the top and select inputs, and I am going to find my main microphone, which you can see right down there, main mic. Notice all these other inputs have their default numerical names, input 1, input 2, input 3, input 4. But right there is my main mic. I'm going to select it, and boom, my main microphone is now showing up on that fader, fader 17 of Fader Bay 2. And if you look down here in the software, or look down here on the hardware, you'll notice that sure enough, on the meter bridge, I have a label that says main mic with a meter. And then down here on this screen, which I'll talk about this screen in a second, we also have my main microphone. Very, very cool. I'm going to go ahead and bring that fader up just for visual purposes. Let me show you my favorite thing about this console. This, to me, is such a beautiful thing. I can't fathom people that just don't enjoy this feature. Let's say I change my mind. Let's say I said, you know what, I actually don't want my main microphone on fader 17. I want it on, say, fader 1 instead. Well, on a lot of other digital consoles, what you would have to do if you wanted to move your input to a different fader is you would have to go back to the patch page. You'd have to go back to that digital patch page and unpatch your XY axis and then choose the next one and reselect it. On this system, you don't have to do that. All you have to do is come up here to the Strip Setup software window, click on your fader once to highlight it, and then just click and hold, and you can move it anywhere you want. So if I wanted to move this fader to fader 1, I just click and hold on it, move it to fader 1, and there it is. It pops up on fader 1. And if you look down on the surface, you'll notice that that fader automatically popped up. Fader 17, which was up earlier, automatically shot down, and then fader 1 automatically shot up. And if you want to keep the camera right there, I'll just show you that I'll move it around a couple more times. So right now I'm going to take that fader and move it to fader 3. I'm going to take that channel, move it to fader 3. Notice that fader 1 automatically moved down. Fader 3 automatically popped up because that's where the fader was on that channel. What I'm doing is I'm literally taking that channel, which in this case is channel 20, and I'm just moving it to a different fader. So the fader is moving to represent where that channel should be. If I select it again and move it again, it'll just automatically relocate that fader position. I don't know personally, I mean, all of this is subjective, but personally, I don't know why anybody would not like this. This is exactly how the mix window in Pro Tools works when you grab faders and start moving them around. It's essentially the same thing. Let's go ahead and put our music up here next. So all you have to do is just pick a fader. I'm going to go ahead and pick fader 13. I'm going to right click on it, select my input, and then find my actual music channel. So here we go. I select it. Boom. Notice it pops right up. On the meter bridge, it says music. And then down here on this screen, which I'll talk about in a second, it also says music. Again, I'm going to bring that fader up just for fun. And if I decided to move it around, I could do the same thing. I could just click on that music channel in my software, click and hold on it, move it around, and it just automatically pops up. So I find configuring the control surface for this console to be very, very, very quick and easy. In fact, if you want to pan up here, I'll show you a few little tricks. If you want to assign a bunch of channels to a bunch of faders all at the same time, what you can actually do is click, hold, and drag a series of faders. So now I have multiple faders selected. If I go back to the first fader that I have selected and right-click, select an input. I'm going to go ahead and select some blank channels right now just so you can see this numerically work. If I select input mono 1, watch what happens. Boom. What the software did was it automatically populated all of my virtual channels into these fader positions in numerical order. So fader 1, or in this case fader 11, became channel 1, followed by channel 2, channel 3, channel 4, channel 5, channel 6. It just cascaded in numerical order all of the channels I had selected until my selection ran out. And if you look here on Fader Bay 2, you'll notice that now we have a meter for every single fader. We have labels for every single fader. Even though they're blank channels at the moment with no inputs, at least they are now on the console. So if I wanted to populate the console really quick, all I would have to do is just select all 30 faders in this layer at the same time. So if I just keep left clicking, I can literally select all 30 faders at the same time. Go to the first one, right click, select input number 1, and then it, boom, just cascades the entire board. So now faders 1 through 30 on this console throughout the 3 fader bays have been completely populated with channels 1 through 30. And you can see here that channel 20 happens to be my main mic, and the fader automatically popped up. So I find configuring this console for use to be extremely quick and user-friendly, just very fast. How many faders can you put on the console? Like how many actual channels can you populate into faders on the console? Well, this is a digital console, which means even though you're limited with faders, you actually have a lot more faders because things are buried in different layers. So right now, I have 30 faders that I can use across my 3 fader bays, but you'll notice that I actually have 6 different layers of fader bays. We have layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, 4, 5, and 6. So even though the control surface only has 30 faders across the 3 bays, I technically have 180 individual faders that I could use at any point in time. I just have to navigate to the different layers. That's kind of a lot. For what we do here at the school, that's more faders than I would ever need. But if you were doing a big show, you could use them all up. Freddie Aldis, the Fox Sports Mixer, on his CalRec, he's got about 200 faders. His console's a little bit bigger than ours, so he has about 100 faders on each layer, and it's a dual layer console. And he more or less uses all 200 of those faders for most of the shows that he does. He doesn't skimp really on his fader usage. He uses all of it for the most part. That is, in a nutshell, how to use the software. So what I would like to do now is navigate to the actual control surface so that I can show you a few things on the control surface. So now that we have the software pretty much out of the way, we've done what we need. Well, I shouldn't say that. We are going to jump back and forth a few more times between the control surface and the software. But for right now, what I'd like to do is mainly focus on the control surface. So the one thing I want to point out about this console that's kind of interesting, if you look at a lot of digital consoles use sort of the same design concept, which is your universal channel. Or what I believe it's, I can't remember the name of the console manufacturer. One of them calls it the fat channel concept. I think it's PreSonus maybe on the Go Live console. But basically, the way a lot of digital boards work, you have lots of faders. You'll have maybe 20 or 30 faders, but you have only one actual channel strip. And what you have to do is you have to select a fader and then whatever fader you select, that fader will become the channel strip. That's how the Midas digital consoles work. You only have one channel section, and then whatever fader you select goes into the channel section. The DigiDesign Venue console that we have in Live Sound, it essentially works that same way as well. Most Yamaha digital consoles I've ever used, they pretty much work that way. So that's very common. Studer does not do that at all. Studer decided to go a very, very different route. In fact, I would say that Studer almost gave you more of an analog sort of a layout on the control surface. Instead of having one universal channel, every single signal has its own channel. So this particular fader that handles channel 11 has an actual channel strip for that channel with its own EQ section, its own mic pre, its own busing, the whole 9 yards. So this is a little bit more of an analog layout, I feel, an analog flow. However, keep in mind that this is still a digital board, which means a lot of the digital flexibility that you have as far as being able to move and manipulate your channels, that we still have that. So right now on fader bay number 2, I have channel 11 to channel 20, which is my main mic, but you still have ways of moving things around. I could take this bank and shift it over. So now I have channel 21. I could go back to channel 11. I could go to channel 1 if I wanted to. We are in the digital world, so we can move things around. Let's take a look at what we have on every individual channel. Right now, I'm going to focus on my main microphone channel. That's the signal we patched earlier. If we go all the way to the top, you have an endless rotary encoder. And what does this endless rotary encoder do? That, by default, is your gain knob. Is it a mic pre or is it a line trim? The answer is, it depends. It can be either one. The Studer, being a digital console, is pretty smart, and it knows the difference between mic inputs and line inputs. And so if you patch something into a line input, the console knows that it's a line input, and it will turn that rotary encoder into a line trim. If it's a mic preamp instead, it will default to be a microphone preamp. And the way that you can tell, I'm not quite sure if you can get it in the camera angle, but at the very, very, very top of this, where the knob is, there's actually a little light that says mic. If you have a microphone signal plugged in and Studer recognizes it as a mic input, you'll see a little light that pops up right there that actually says mic. Right now, because I don't really have any microphones plugged in, everything is pretty much defaulting to be a line input. But if you had it plugged into a mic input, it would show up as mic. In fact, I think I can actually manipulate that really, really quickly, just to be able to show you that. I'm going to temporarily change the input of that channel to be a mic input. So now you can tell all of these other channels are selected to be line input, except for this one. This one I've temporarily actually selected it to have a mic input, and you can see that there's a tiny little red light there that pops up, which signifies that it is a mic preamp and not a line trim. So at the very top, we have our gain knob, either mic pre or line trim, depending on what you're doing. Below that, we have 3 buttons that say input 1, input 2, and then gen. What are those all about? Well, to explain those buttons, I actually want to go to a page in the software that you guys haven't seen yet. So if we navigate back to the software, I am going to click once again on the Views button to bring up my navigation bar. And I'm going to click on a window called Channel Patch. In a nutshell, this is literally signal flow. This page essentially shows you cycle 1 signal flow that you've been learning since cycle 1. The only difference is when we draw signal flow here at the conservatory, we draw it horizontally left to right. This instead represents it vertically up and down. But it is exactly the same signal flow that you learned in cycle 1, cycle 2, cycle 3, etc. Let's take a look. Here is the signal that I've chosen to enter channel number 20. Channel 20 is my main microphone. So that would be, let's say, a handheld mic. That main microphone signal, if you just follow the line, is going to go into an input. That input, of course, is going to be represented by a mic pre. From the mic pre, our signal then goes to a fader. From the fader, the signal goes to the pan, and then from the pan, the signal goes to the bus. That is literally cycle 1 signal flow that you learned in the Tascam room with, I don't know, Dave or Alan or somebody. Input, fader, pan, bus. Input, fader, pan, bus. This is no different than the Tascam as far as that part of signal flow goes. Now, once you got into the Neotech, you added something to that signal flow. You added the insert send and the insert return. Well, sure enough, we have that right here. So now you have your mic input, or you have your microphone, which goes to the mic input. The mic input will go to the insert, send, and return. And notice that this is represented as a loop, the same way we do it in class. So out of the console into the gear, out of the gear, back into the console, like an effects loop. And then from the insert, it goes to the fader, and then the pan, and then the bus. Cool. So that's pretty simple, just like the Neotech. Then once you got into the API, you started to add things like the upper 200, lower 200, all those different modules that would contain things like compressors and EQs. Well, that's kind of what we have here with my EQ and dynamics. So now my microphone goes to the mic pre. The mic pre goes to the EQ. The EQ goes to the dynamic section, compressor, limiter, expander gate. And then from there, it goes to the insert, and then the fader, and then the pan, and then the bus. So this is just every signal flow you've ever seen. There's nothing really complex about this. However, let me show you one of my favorite things about what you can do on this page regarding signal flow. At this point in time, you've already experienced the SSL. In the SSL, you have the ability to move all of your processing to be in any order as far as the signal path goes. You've got all those buttons in the middle of the channel that you can use to put the EQ before the compressor before the EQ, if you remember that. Well, you can essentially do the same thing here, but what's nice is you don't have to remember what the individual buttons do. All you have to do is just grab with your mouse one of these blocks and simply move it. So right now in the signal flow for my main microphone, my EQ is coming before the compressor. Some people don't like that because if you EQ before you enter a compressor, that can change how the signal is behaving. You can accidentally make a de-esser that way. So you might want the compressor before the EQ. Simple. I'm going to grab the EQ and drag it down. Drop it on top of the dynamic section, and they basically change places. So now you have your compressor before your EQ. You could put it back if you wanted to. Right now, my insert point comes after the compression and the EQ. You could have it come before all that if you wanted to. So that way you're inserting before you're hitting the console's processing. It really doesn't matter. You can do anything you want. You can move anything anywhere you want as far as the signal flow order. It is just so easy and so lovely. And for me, it's so visual. I always kind of had trouble conceptualizing those buttons on the SSL as far as what they were doing to your processing order and signal flow, because you're just pushing buttons. You'd have to think about in your brain what you're doing. In this, it's really easy. You can just see plain as day what's happening with the signal and what order it's going in. Same thing with the meter bridge. If you guys remember your API console, that was the first console that you guys used that really gave you some flexible meter bridge options. You can meter the input to a channel. You can meter the output of a channel. You can meter your buses or your direct outs. Same kind of thing on here. By default, my meters are set up to meter post the input but pre everything else. So I can see the signal entering my channel before it even hits the fader or anything. If you would rather meter the output of the channel, you can do that. You can click the meter selection that comes post fader, or if you wanted to, just like on the API, you can meter the output of your direct out. So you can see what you're sending to a tape machine, let's say. I'm going to move my metering back to pre-input or pre-fader post-input because that's kind of where I like it. And going back to why we got to this software page in the first place, on the physical control surface underneath your gain knob, you had 3 buttons. A button that said input 1, a button that said input 2, and then a button that said tone generator. Those 3 buttons are referring to this section in the software. What's really, really, really cool about every channel on this board is that every channel can have up to 3 different inputs feed that channel at any point in time. So right now, my main microphone is feeding this channel. You can see that main mic is feeding the channel. But let's say my main microphone goes bad. What do I do if my main microphone goes bad? Well, what you can do is you can actually select a backup microphone. You can actually hook up a backup microphone and have that be accessible in the software on this channel's secondary input. Now, right now, you'll notice that my input 2 selection is blank. What would you want to do if you wanted to set up a backup mic, a spare mic? Well, what I would do is I would actually go back to my general patch page. So I'm going to click on views and go to general patch. And you can see here's my main mic going into channel 20, software channel 20. But if you look up here, you have a section that says target. What does that mean, target? Well, target basically means when you're making your patch, where do you want your input source to actually go? You know, what's the target? What are you trying to aim at? And in this particular case, my target for the past hour has been channel input number 1. So all the inputs that I've patched have gone into my channels on the primary input. Well, guess what you can do? You can select channel input number 2. So now all of my inputs that I'm going to patch are going to go into the same channels they were before, but on that secondary input. Notice that channel 20, which was green earlier because there's something patched into it, if I go to my secondary input for that, channel 20, the green goes away because I don't have anything patched into its second input. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down to my backup mics. Remember I told you an hour ago that I personally like to use my analog mic pre's for backup mics, for kind of spares. I'm going to select local mic number 1, and I'm going to patch that into channel 20, but it's not going into the primary input, it's going into the secondary input. And then I'm going to go ahead and label this backup mic. I'm just going to put BU for backup really quickly for short. So now if I go back to my channel patch page, so again, I go to the views button and I go to my channel patch page, notice now my main mic is the primary input, but my backup mic is patched into the secondary input. And if I actually want to select my backup mic, let's say the main microphone dies and I need to select the backup mic, all I have to do is just click that button right there that says input number 2, boom. Notice it lights up. Notice it lights up, but more importantly, notice what happened on the meter bridge. Notice that the meter automatically changed labeling from my main microphone to my backup microphone. That button is literally changing the input to the channel. The software is going to change its labeling to reflect that. And if you look up in the actual software page, you'll notice that now my backup microphone has been connected into this channel path. The main microphone is now disabled, it's unlinked, and the backup mic is there. So this is really, 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 really handy. If you're doing a broadcast and all of a sudden your main microphone goes bad, you can just hit the backup mic button and you're there a second later. Optimistically, if your reflexes are nice and quick, you'll only be off the air for just a couple seconds. What is the third input that they offer us? By default, the third input is a tone generator. So if you wanted to route signal through the console to make sure that everything is working properly, that the console is working, your buses are working, your speakers are working, but you don't have a microphone plugged in, that's not a big deal. You can just access the tone generator. So let's go ahead and do that right now. I actually don't have a mic plugged in or music plugged in, so I'm just going to turn on the tone generator. So watch what happens when I hit the button for my third input that says Gen. It automatically pops up my tone generator. I can use my trim to get it to where I want. By default, the tone generator is set to a 1,000 hertz tone. I'm sure that surprises none of you. And it is also set to output a minus 20 dBFS level, which makes sense because minus 20 dBFS is kind of recognized by most people as the digital version of nominal level. So I now have signal going into the console. Excellent. What do I have below the mic pre knob or the gain knob and then my input buttons? All right, you've got all of these processing buttons right here. What do? You guys have seen this before. There's a console we have here at the school called the API. What do you have to do if you want to do anything on the API console? You have to turn it on. On the API console, literally everything you want to do has to be turned on. If you want to pan something, you have to turn the pan on. If you want to EQ something, you have to turn it on. If you want to use an auxiliary send, you have to turn it on. That's exactly how this console works. Anything at all that you want to use, you have to turn it on. So let's see what we have on and off buttons for. All right. First of all, right here at the top, we have high cut and low cut. High pass filter, low pass filter, if you want to use some different terminology. High cut would be a low pass filter, and then low cut would be a high pass filter. Below that, you have delay, which at the moment we actually have disabled. This is a digital console, and whenever you are working in the digital world, you're going to have some timing issues as far as signals hitting the console at certain times and other consoles hitting destinations at other times. So what this console does give you the ability to do is put a millisecond delay on every single channel. However, we have that delay disabled in this particular build that we're doing. So notice when I push that, nothing happens. Just to let you know, that's normal for us. Below that, we have the insert if you wanted to use an external piece of gear. Below that, we have compressor and limiter. Below that, we have expander gate. Below that, we have EQ. And then below that, we have pan. Pretty cool. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my compressor limiter, expander gate, my EQ, and my pan. I'm going to turn those things on right now. You know what? I'm going to turn on the high pass and low pass filter too, because why not? So now, for channel 20, I have all of that stuff turned on. Well, boy, that kind of stinks, though. That means literally if you wanted to EQ like a whole bunch of stuff, just like the API, you would have to turn on your EQ and turn on your EQ and turn on your EQ and just turn everything on individually. Well, yeah, if you were on the API, but remember, you are on a digital console, so even though this console is laid out in sort of an analog fashion, it is still a digital board, so you have some digital advantages. And one of them is the select button down here at the bottom. Below every single fader, you have a blue link select button, and by default, it's a select button. So if you just select the fader, okay, cool, you're selecting a fader and you'll see it in the software we have selected. However, these buttons also act as temporary links. If I push and hold down on one of my select buttons and then I push another select button, notice they all have lit up. I have temporarily linked all 10 of these faders together, which means any change I make on one will be reflected on all of them. So if I move my main microphone fader up, the rest of them come up. Okay, that's pretty cool. That means now, if I come back up here and I turn on my EQ, it turns it on for all of them. If I turn on my pan and my compressor, limiter, expander gate, you see that it comes on for everything. So that is pretty darn groovy. And you can even do that across the whole board if you wanted to. If you wanted to turn on the EQ for every single channel, you could just hit select on one fader, select on the other fader. I now have all 40 faders selected at the same time, and I could go ahead and just turn the EQ on for all of them at the same time. So don't be afraid to use some of these digital advantages. They are there for a reason. Okay, now that I have all of my stuff turned on, my compressor, limiter, expander gate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, how do I actually manipulate all of those things? All right, this is probably the coolest part about the board. If you continue to move your eyes down, you have a screen. This screen is very special. It is called the Vistonics view. And this entire screen is essentially a touch screen. You have a couple rows of endless rotary encoder knobs that can become all sorts of different things, which I'll show you in a second. But the section of the screen that I really want to focus on is this one. If you look down here at the bottom of this screen, again, it's called the Vistonics view, you'll notice that you have three separate sections that are color-coded. You have a section that's color-coded in green, one that's red, and one that's yellow. Those are what I like to call DSP blocks. Those allow you to affect the DSP of a channel, such as EQ, compression, and all you have to do is just touch with your finger one of these blocks. And here's what happens. I'm going to go ahead and touch the green square. Notice all of these rotary encoders completely changed what they were doing to become my entire dynamic section. So now for this fader, channel 20, I am now looking at, on the top row, these 5 knobs are my limiter. Below that we have compressor. Below that we have expander. And then below that we have gate. Limiter, compressor, expander, gate. Very, very, very cool. And again, you may have to make sure that everything is on before you use it. I don't know how well you can tell on the camera, but do you notice that when I turn the compressor and the limiter and everything off, it kind of goes a darker shade of green, and then when I turn it back on, it kind of pops up and becomes a lighter shade of green. So always make sure your stuff is on. And I can now do whatever I want to on that channel. Here's what I really, really like about this console. You can affect or change the settings of more than one fader at a time. If you have a digital console like the Midas or a Yamaha, because you only have one channel strip, you only have one compressor section. So you can really only compress one channel at a time. You'd have to select and then compress and then select and then compress. On this, I could be compressing channel 20 while Zach comes up to the board and actually compresses channel number 1. If I touch the green square for channel number 1, notice that that Vistonics view changes. And then I could also be compressing something in the control bay while Brock is maybe over here compressing something on fader bay number 3. So you could actually have multiple people up on the console doing multiple things at the same time. You don't just have to compress things one at a time. You could have multiple things happening. It's just a delicious thing. That's what the green square is. All of your dynamics, limiter, compressor, expander, gate. So that's what the green square is. The green square is your limiter, compressor, expander, gate. Below that, you have the red square, the red DSP block. If you push that, that will light up your EQ section. You have a 4-band parametric EQ on this console per channel, plus separate high and low pass filter. So this is going to be your lows, your low mids, your high mids, your highs. And what's really, really, really cool, if Zach can get a zoom in on the Vistonics view, watch what happens when I actually boost or cut or manipulate my EQ. You actually do see the graphic on the Vistonics screen actually change. So when I boost the gain, you can see the bell curve. If I move the frequency of that bell curve, you can see that move as well. So it kind of gives you like a little mini display of what you're doing. The compressor works the same way. If I wanted to limit something, you can see that the knee is changing on that limiter. So that's pretty cool. So 4-band parametric EQ plus high and low pass filter. The yellow square at the very, very, very bottom is going to be your panoramic potentiometer. So that brings up all of your panning options, of which you have a lot. Now, we here at the school, we mainly run our shows in stereo or mono because of our delivery system being YouTube. YouTube doesn't really deliver surround sound, at least not to my knowledge. If they've changed that, I sure don't know about it. But this console does have a lot of different surround sound options here. If you look up here at the very top, you have LR, LCR, LCRS, 5.1, EX, and then 7.1. So you can do a lot of different output, mixing styles with this. It's very, very cool. We actually have the room set up to be a Dolby Atmos room, which is kind of like its own separate little thing that we'll get into later. So that's my channel. Gain, processing on, processing. What do we have down here in the bottom? Well, obviously you have your fader. That's kind of self-explanatory. But you've got 3 buttons up here that are kind of worth talking about. You have a button at the very top called Channel. When you push the Channel button, that basically shows you the input section for that channel. I'm going to select a different input at the moment so you can see a few more options. So again, I'm going to go to my main microphone. I'm going to select Channel. That Channel button brings up what I refer to as the input section of your console. What do you see in the input section of the console? Well, you would see, first of all, your mic preamp. And I know what you're thinking. Well, wait a minute. I thought we already had the mic preamp here. Well, this is a digital console, so you've got flexibility to sometimes have something show up in different places. That is a hard gain knob. They gave that to you as a courtesy. However, you also have the ability to manipulate a software gain knob if you would like. So when you hit the Channel button, one of your knobs becomes your gain knob. And yes, it is the same as this one at the moment. So notice when I turn this gain knob up and down, you are actually seeing the level of this knob also change and go up and down. So right now they are the same knob. It's your mic pre. Phantom power. Below your mic pre knob is your 48 volts of phantom power, because why not? You need to have that. And then next to that is going to be your polarity reverse. Of course, this console doesn't call it polarity reverse, it calls it phase, which is endlessly frustrating to me because that's not what it is. It's polarity reverse, but you have to pick your battles. And so those are the three main things that you find in the input section of almost any console: mic pre, phantom power control, and then polarity reverse. There they are. Below that, below the channel button that is, you have a button that says miscellaneous. If you push the miscellaneous button, what that does is it will light up all three of your DSP blocks at the same time. The green, the red, the yellow, it'll just sort of light them all up at the same time. So that way, this whole ViSonics view is basically this one channel. And last but not least, below the miscellaneous knob, you have a button that says bus assign. How do you get signals out of this console? Same way you do on any console. You bus it somewhere. So I'm going to take this fader, and I'm going to hit bus assign, and let's take a look at the buses. First of all, this console does have some multi-track buses on it, even though we don't typically use it as a multi-track recording console. We did go ahead and program it with some multi-track buses so that you can see them. At the moment, we only have 12 multi-track buses. You can have as many as you want when you do the DSP build, but for right now, 12 is just kind of what we have. Below that, you have a mix minus bus, and that is a very, very, very specific broadcast style bus. In broadcast, a lot of times we make headphone mixes for on-air talent using a mix minus, and what that means is we're making a mix minus certain elements, and a lot of times we do that because of delay. Now you can make a mix minus bus on any other console you've ever used before just by deciding what auxes to turn up and what NUCs to turn up. But on this particular console, they actually created a very specific style of bus called a mix minus to make that process easier because you're going to do it so much in broadcast. So that's what that is. Below that, we have groups. This console has 5 groups. It has a surround sound group. Left, right, center, LFE, left surround, and right surround, which I believe is SMPTE order. And then you have 4 stereo groups, 1 left and right, 2 left and right, 3 left and right, 4 left and right. And then last but not least, we have 3 main output buses. We have a surround sound bus, and then we have 2 traditional stereo buses. How do you actually assign your fader to go to any of these things? Well, this is a touch screen. So you just start touching stuff. All you do is just touch the buttons, touch the buses, and decide where you want it to go. Now, in that particular case, I just did a very inappropriate thing, and I just pushed everything. So they do give you a little button here that says clear, and if you hit the clear button, it'll clear everything out. But that's essentially how you bus something somewhere. What I want is this fader to go to my stereo bus. So I'm going to go to my master stereo bus, 1 left, 1 right, and notice they pop up red. Pretty darn simple. I'm going to bring up that fader. Where is my stereo bus? Well, it's located at the moment in the control bay. There it is, stereo bus 1. I'm going to go ahead and bring it up. Notice when I bring it up, because I already have signal bus to it, you see it, and that takes us to my master section up here where I can choose how my speakers work. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my speakers because they kind of need to be on in order for them to work. Remember how on the API you can select individual things to actually listen to through your speakers? Same thing on this. In my control room, this whole area here is called source selector. What source do you want to listen to? Well, I'm in my control room right now, and I want to listen to my master stereo 1 stereo bus. So I'm going to select that. Here's my control room level. I've got 3 different sets of speakers that I can listen to. Just like the Neotech or the API, you can change your speakers. I've got main speakers, I've got alternate speakers, I have near field speakers. In this room, I have literally no choice. In this room, I only have main speakers that I can select. If you select the other 2, you won't hear anything. So I'll go ahead and select that. And then last but not least, you have a mute button and a dim button. I'm going to turn both of those off. And there is my 1000 hertz tone. I know it's really obnoxious, I apologize. So I'm going to hit the dim button, but there it all is. We also have the ability to solo individual speakers and then mute individual speakers. If you guys remember from the D room, you have the intonato, and the intonato lets you solo and mute individual speakers. That's kind of the same thing here. This is like a little mini intonato sort of a section, if you will. The last thing that I would really like to go over on the console is auxiliary sends. How do you adjust your auxiliary sends? Well, if we pan back down here, you'll notice that we have a section of buttons right here that say Global View. Whatever this is selected to, that's what all of your knobs, your endless rotary encoders, are going to show you by default across the whole console. So if you wanted to, you could hit the button that says EQ. And I am now looking at the EQ for all of my channels at the same time. If I wanted to compress everything really quickly, I could press my compressor limiter button, and now I'm looking at the compressor limiter on every single channel, all at the exact same time. That's kind of nifty. What I usually leave it on is I usually leave it on this button right there, which says aux mono 1 through 4. Aux mono 1 through 4. So these knobs, by default, these rotary encoders by default, now become auxiliary 1, auxiliary 2, auxiliary 3, auxiliary 4. All I have to do if I wanted to use auxiliary 1 is turn it on and turn it up. Every aux has an aux master. Where are they? Well, on this console, Zach and myself prefer our aux masters to be on faders. And so we put the aux masters onto faders, and we put those faders onto the control bay faders under layer 3. So if you go to the control bay, find your fader page, and select layer 3, boom, now what we're looking at is all of our aux masters. We have aux mono masters 1 through 4, aux stereo masters 1 through 4. Hey, I thought you said we have 8 mono auxes and 8 stereo auxes. We do. However, the shows that we do here at the school are not so advanced that we need all 8 of those. In fact, in the past 8 years, I can't remember the last time we ever did use all 8 of them. So at the moment, we just have 4 and 4 up here. Right now, I have my tone generator bused to auxiliary bus 1. So I'm going to go to aux mono 1's master, bring it up, and sure enough, on the meter bridge, you can see that I've got some signal right there as well. So in a nutshell, that is the console. The last 2 buttons we have here at the bottom are mute and solo. Those are self-explanatory. And to be perfectly honest, that's really about all that we're going to get into on this console. Everything that we just went over is what we will need to do to be able to perform our show. Now, is there a lot more that you can learn about this console? Absolutely. Like I said at the beginning of this whole class, however, the focus of our class is in broadcast audio. The Studer Vista 9 just happens to be the console that we have in here. So we don't really focus on this console a whole lot because our main focus is on the broader concept of broadcast. If you want to learn more about this console, specifically if you would like to get this Studer Vista online certification, I highly recommend that you download that document off of Crass Connect. We helped create we did create a step-by-step document that walks you through the process of how to navigate the Harman University website to achieve and get the Studer Vista online certification. So I highly recommend that you do that if you are interested in becoming certified on this console. And with that being said, I think that mainly wraps it up for today. We will go over a few more things about how this console works during our on-site classes that will be held after this. So there's a few little knickknacks about, how to patch auxiliary sends and things of that nature that we'll go over on the on-site class. But for the most part, that is it. Thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions, ask Zach, because I think he's running the Zoom session today. And I will see you again